Hi, and welcome to Global Student Voices, the podcast that brings you exciting stories and invaluable insights from students, educators, and thought leaders around the world. I'm your host, Coach Martin, with 30 years of experience in international education. Join us each time when we navigate the exciting journey between international secondary school and university. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome, Heidi. I'm so glad to have you on the show. I'm excited to get to share your story and what you're doing. I think it's amazing, and I think schools are should be clamoring over themselves to get you on their schedule once they've heard about what you bring them. But Heidi, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your experience is in international education.
My name's Heidi, and I have worked in China and in Thailand for about 6 years. And I was in the U.S. for most of my career, the first many years, as a math teacher at the middle school and high school level, and then as a math specialist for a district of about 25,000 kids. So I did a lot of professional development and leading the school system in making big changes. When I was a high school teacher, our school the teachers kind of got excited together about how to make teaching and learning better. And as a result of that, our test scores went up from 29% to 60% in 5 years. The state went up from 40 to 50. So we had a huge gain. And it was just based on getting kids to be thinkers and doers of mathematics, of good, rich mathematics, and moving the teacher from being the presenter of information to the one who helps students become the thinkers about mathematics.
Yeah, that's a huge shift. I was meeting with some leaders just today and talking about the disservice they had experienced. They were all business leaders now, and how they've just recently, some of them in their late 40s, early 50s, just recently figured out why math was important in high school. And they wish their teachers had helped them think about math and to learn, not just, you just have to learn it. You just have to get a grade. You need it to get into college. You need it but no, like tangible, like this improves your life, improves the way you think. And so tell me a little bit about, I guess, kind of the broad paint strokes. Don't give away the secret sauce, but the broad strokes of how what you do is different than what the traditional kind of math class looks like.
In my classroom, my students, I only talk for maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of class, and I don't talk anymore after that. I talk to groups or individuals, but I'm not presenting information. I'm giving them a rich task that they're thinking about. And my job as a teacher is to listen to what they're saying and make sense of what each kid is trying to think about or what each group is thinking about collectively, and trying to get the kids to become the ones who own the content. There's a great book called Building Thinking Classrooms that I think every teacher should read. High school, middle school, elementary. And it talks about how to get kids to become the doers and thinkers of mathematics. And the teacher becomes the support to their thinking. And then at the end, the teacher steps in and helps the class articulate what they've learned. And the kids then, I love it because he calls the note making instead of note taking.
Yeah.
Because you don't want the kids to mimic what I write. You want them to be able to make the notes about what they have learned today. So, and he talks about writing it for your future forgetful self. That's why we take the notes. It's not because the teacher said you should take the notes.
Yeah. Wow. What a dramatic change. And just from somebody who's been in the classroom and trying to create thinking classrooms, it feels really daunting getting started. But and I could do that all day, every day. Like, that's exciting. That's what I signed up for as a teacher, right? I mean, I didn't sign up, to be a speaker for an hour 4 times a day with the same content. Like, that was super boring for me. This sounds way better. So why isn't everybody just on board and already doing this? I mean, this obviously is best practice. Like, that's research which shows this is the best practice classroom. What's in our way, or what have you experienced as roadblocks?
There are actually quite a few things in our way. One of them is that the culture of mathematics, and it seems to be international. There's a culture of mathematics that is mathematics classrooms, that this is how we teach math. And I can tell you what it is. You come into class, you check your homework, then the teacher gives you a mark maybe, then you get the notes, then you practice, then you go home and do more problems, and then you come back and you check the homework. That is such a rich and deep culture that is really hard to break. principals don't understand the changes that we're trying to make, and it's then difficult for them to articulate to parents. And parents then, they all know what school looks like, what school math looks like. So we have to help inform not just the teachers and the kids, but it's really a cultural shift, and it is difficult. And my twin sister was an elementary school principal nearby, and her school was able to make the shift, but she keeps telling me over and over again, the only reason I could make this shift is because I had you on speed dial telling me what to tell the parents, because the parents would complain that you're not doing school right. And she'd be like, wait a minute. Yeah, we are. Your kids are thinking. And her scores, same thing. Her scores went way up over the course of the time that she was the principal and the teachers were making these changes. It's also really hard for teachers to make the changes and to let go of the ownership and when I first started thinking about this, I'd been a teacher for quite a few years. And I remember thinking, I didn't say it today. And so I wonder if the kids learned it. It's like, and so if I said it, they certainly learned it. But it took me a long time to let go of the fact I didn't have to be the one to say it, and the kids could still learn it.
Yeah.
They the ones to say it.
Yeah. Evidence actually indicates that what we say, very little of what they learn is what we say. It's all about what they experience, and the more they think about it and the more they're engaged in it, the more likely they are to actually retain it over time, which again is where you see those boosts in test scores and in just overall math ability, and particularly long term. I would think that would have an impact. We talked one time before, and I'm curious, what's the evidence supporting this movement?
The research, you've got the brain-based research that talks about brain-based learning and how we learn, which I think is being consistent across all disciplines. The kids have to be the ones engaging in the thinking. And so we have the brain-based research, but there was a big study, that's the one that a lot of high school teachers point to when they're trying to make an argument, by Jo Boaler. And she talked, the Railside School, she had a study in California and a study in London. And the students at the schools, I know in the California study, there was an experimental school and a control school. They had the same test scores at the end, at the end of the year. But when she went back, some oil tycoon evidently paid her to do a big study, a follow-up study with the kids who had gone through these two programs. And what they found was that the kids who had been through a more thinking approach to learning mathematics were having better jobs. They were doing economically better than their parents, but the students who went through the more traditional schools were economically equal to their parents. The kids from the progressive schools were thinking much more about, or were able to be in work situations where they could communicate with their teammates about what they were trying to accomplish, because they had done that throughout their high school math program. And that's what they pointed it to.
Wow. So a direct link in flourishing at a much higher level down the road. So when we think about why we want good education for our kids, whether we're thinking about it from a district level or from an administrative level or even as a parent, that's the end goal, right? I mean, we want our kids to flourish. We do care about test scores because they impact things. I think all of us pretty much agree that we want that longer term flourishing impact. And my own math experience, I went to a pretty traditional international school in Kenya, but I think in my math area, I had a math and science teachers who were much more focused on our thinking and much less focused on and we didn't have state tests or things like that we had to worry about. But when I got to college, I performed so much better than my peers who had better math grades and had higher SAT math scores than I did. But I performed in college much better. And the transition in terms of my understanding of those major concepts and their impact on just everyday life, I feel like I'm way ahead of my peers. And I do point back to those math teachers. I gave them very specific, because I think they went way beyond what the school had intended in terms of math curriculum. I think it was those teachers that brought us that enrichment. But here, what a much more significant impact you can have. And I think for international schools, as they compete with each other for those tuition for enrollment, and obviously have the best intention for their students long term in mind, this surely has to be, if they're aware of this difference, they would have to be on board. So it seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the biggest barrier is for them to even know this difference, like even to be aware that, hey, there's something that you can do that has a dramatic positive impact on your students and student outcomes, and you're just not aware of this. And then, like you said, having you on speed dial, like I'm thinking the contract I would want to sign with you, in addition to coming and doing PD, is I would want to have you on monthly retainer, and permission to text you, call you, and say, hey, Heidi, I've got a parent-teacher meeting this week, and we're getting a lot of pushback. How do we prep for this?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. And one of the things that I believe would be really important if I was a principal is to upfront have somebody come in and lead PD with parents, so that you would, and maybe even whenever the consultant was in the school, to do a parent workshop and have parents come in and experience it. I one time had an experience where some parents came in pretty angry about the changes that were happening, not as a result of our school, but as a result of the expectations of the state. And by the time they left, they're like, oh my gosh, I wish I learned math this way. This way makes so much sense. And I guess most importantly for an international school, I want kids to come to my school every day being excited to learn. And I think many of our math classes make it, and mine included for many, many years, made it really difficult. I wasn't excited because I was doing all the thinking. I want kids and parents and everybody to think math is beautiful, math is amazing, and we can make that happen. But we're going to have to do some changes on that, changes in our practice to make it happen for kids. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the amazing breakthrough. I think that the transformative learning environment, that place where kids are growing and enriched and inspired. And we talk a lot about STEM and how important it is in the career. We need to be emphasizing this stuff for our careers. This is where our kids need to, and then we don't do anything about it in terms of changing the curriculum. And this is an indictment of me. Like when I was principal, I had my main math teacher was fantastic. She was really, really good. And we absolutely hamstrung her with the curriculum. I mean, we absolutely tied her hands, and she had tremendous impact despite the barrier we put between her and those students. If we'd equipped her this way and given her the freedom to have a classroom like this, it would have not only changed the lives of those students who were gifted math. I mean, we had a lot of really gifted mathematicians who have gone on to do great things in math and science. But wow, we could have really empowered. And the better thing is that other 20, 30% of students who hated math and just hated going to math. And I rearranged the schedule to accommodate those students we went to a block schedule in part so they didn't have to have math every day, because our attendance rate was lower on math days.
My heart, Scott.
I know, it was awful. It was just awful. It was so painful to see, and we tried to accommodate. And here I'm like, oh, if I had known that we could have, empowered. We were a small school. We only had we had one main math teacher. We had two teachers, but we really had the one that was the driving force. If she had been empowered and equipped, it would have absolutely transformed really our whole school. Like, it would have changed. We spent a lot of time on trying to teach critical thinking and trying to develop thinkers in all of our areas except math, which was the exact opposite. Like, we could have started there, and how much richer we would have been for it.
I believe that, period. I think that if we would figure out systemically in any system how to change what we're doing in math, we will change the entire system. Because mathematics, as I said, has such a strong culture. And if you can break the culture just in that one space, you're going to break the culture everywhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the main reasons I think math has such a hold in schools. It influences the schedule. It influences, if we track in math, we have some kids in the honors and lower and all the different levels. That influences every other class. It influences when you can have band. It influences so many things. And so I agree with you. I think if we can change math, we will change the system.
Hey there, GSV listeners. Before we dive back into our conversation, I wanted to take a moment to thank our incredible guests, the students, school officials, and thought leaders who inspire us with their stories and insights. As you're listening today, be thinking of ways that you can support the guests of this show. There are links in the descriptions with just some of the ways. I'm Coach Martin, your host and your partner in navigating the university journey. Whether you're exploring university options, preparing for admissions, or seeking support during your academic path, my books provide practical guidance and insights to empower your university success. Join me in individual coaching, group sessions, or courses designed to equip you for university life and beyond.
I am from Brazil, but I attended an American school in Indonesia for my secondary education. So my situation was really confusing and really scary. Coach Martin really understands global students, and he loves helping us out.
Again, thank you for listening. Explore the podcast description for links and resources and contacts discussed in today's episode. Visit www.theglobalstudentsolutions.com to learn more and embark on your journey toward university success. Now, let's return to our conversation. Yeah, I'm. This has been, just in talking with you over the last couple of months, has been a revolution in how I thought about systemic change for institutions, for schools that are struggling, because, every time we did PD on flipping the classroom or any other kind of new way to help engage students better, the pushback was, well, we can do that in all our classes except math. It was always except math. And so we end up defaulting and teaching everything else like our poor way of teaching math, as opposed to what a great model it would be. I mean, I think the demand would change. I think the expectation would change. If our students are engaged in math like this, then they're going to be engaged this way in English class and in social studies. They aren't going to tolerate lectures, because that pushback of why in the world, they're going to, that part of their brain, once it's activated, and I think activating it in mathematics, I can't imagine. I've only ever taught Algebra 1, right? That's the only math class I've ever taught, because I'm a social science person. And so I just taught that for a couple different years because the need was there, right? And I can't even imagine, I can't get my head around how this revolutionizes everything at school. It changes, what are we looking for in terms of our curriculum? Do we get rid of Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, trigonometry, pre-calc? Our offerings change? Are the way we do our, help me even kind of package this. What does this look like to change, and how does it change in midstream? You're going to come into a school, decides to change, then we've got 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders in our secondary school. What do they do next year? What does their course look like? What are their transcripts? Where are we headed? And how do we make that transition?
I actually think you have to change the transcript.
Okay.
I think if I were setting up a system to change a school, to help the school make sense, I would start at the lowest grade I could. So if I was, I would start in the elementary school. So the school that my sister was at, there was a teacher, and she taught math and she taught elementary school. And after she took the workshops and started rethinking math, as you said, everything else changed. She goes, oh my gosh, why am I not doing this in social studies? Why am I not asking kids to do this kind of thinking in English? I now know the types of questions to ask that get that kind of thinking in every class. But I think the problem with trying to start at the high school level, and I will tell you, every one of these gray hairs belongs to trying to start at the high school I was at, where we had those great results, because kids come in pre-installed with viruses that we have to then break. It's also very difficult. I get why the high school math teacher says, but I have to get kids ready for the AP test, the IB test, the A-levels tests. I get that. So I wouldn't start there. I would start if I had an middle school, high school, I would start at the middle school and work towards, so that the kids, when they got there, were pushing for a different way of thinking rather than the teacher having to change their way of thinking at that late date. Because every teacher at the high school knows I've got to get these things done. And no school by itself is going to change that. So I wouldn't even try to change that. I would just let those teachers continue to do what they're doing until the kids were prepared. So the teachers who teach the higher levels will teach some ninth graders or some seventh graders, and their practice will change as the kids change, so that when they get to the upper levels, the kids are more prepared to be not only thinkers, but they'll hopefully have better skills because they'll have learned them better as younger kids. So you'll spend less time doing reviews. You'll spend less time having to reteach stuff that they should have learned in seventh grade, which every AP and IB teacher has to do. So that's why I think you would start younger and work.
So as far as the strategy, it's kind of a little bit longer term strategy. Would you, just out of curiosity, I'm trying to think of small schools that, because that's kind of who we are looking at in terms of our central audience. Small schools maybe only have 2 math teachers that cover 7th to 12th grade and cover all the course and content. This feels like, just in terms of restructuring how we deliver content, like if it's delivered in kind of this exploratory way, am I saying this correctly? Then it seems like the transition would happen even more. Like you're saying, we're all in with our 7th and 8th graders. We're just changing how we do this. But because it's the same teachers and they're going to see those fairly fast results, they're going to begin implementing some of that in each of their content areas, regardless of what they're teaching. And you'll start to see that transformation. I think you would, like small schools, I think are at an advantage here.
For sure. Yeah. And they're going to start to see, when I'm doing this approach to lecture or approach to giving a good worthwhile task and what kids can do with it, they're going to see that I can do these small things and get big results. Then of course they'll use those at the higher levels, but they're not going to, more at the 7th and 6th, 7th, 8th grade level. You can throw out bigger chunks and practice and learn some things. And as you develop those skills, then you're going to transfer them, like you said, organically towards the higher levels, the things that you think your higher levels will engage in without having to break their culture.
Yeah. Yeah. At smaller schools, you can break culture. I mean, we did that. We took some pretty significant aspects of our culture and flipped them on their head. It just took some concentrated school-wide effort over really not that long, 6 weeks or so, and students can change, especially if you've got everybody kind of on board, including parents, like you said, that's involving them. One of the things that I think about from an administrator side is this just how the teacher teaches, or is our curriculum against us? Is there a different way? Do we need new curriculum, need new books? Do we not need books? Like I'm just trying to think about.
I think you definitely need books. I think one of the things that a lot of schools do is say, well, teachers can figure this out on their own. And the answer is no, they cannot figure this out on their own. The content is challenging, and trying to get a good trajectory from kindergarten through 12th grade without missing big holes is very difficult. So 100% you need a curricular resource that someone who's professional has figured out. I do think there are some that make this change much easier. There are a couple that are free online that I think are fantastic. Open Up Resources and Illustrative Mathematics are 2 of them that I highly recommend. But after I read Building Thinking Classrooms, I actually think you can probably do a lot of this without buying a new textbook. You will just have to use that textbook much differently. So rather than saying we're just going to do every problem in the book, you're going to, I'm going to assign this particular problem because I know it's out of the textbook, because I know it's going to give me the biggest bang for the buck. I'm going to have the kids working on that one. As soon as a group is done, I'm going to give them the next one with intentionality, but I'm not going to use the textbook in the way that I've used it before. I'm going to be judicious, and I'm probably not going to assign 75 problems at the end of the day. I'm going to ask the kids to make decisions about what do I need to be able to make sense of this. If I understand it, why am I going to go home and do another 15 problems that I've already shown you I can do. But if I don't know how to do it, then I do need to go home and do some more practice. I need to come in and get help from the teacher. We need to start to figure out what the resources are to get the kid the help they need. So I think you can do a lot of this with the textbooks we already have. Some textbooks, however, make it much, much easier because the problems are really designed to be thinking problems that allow for more access points, that allow for more ways to solve the problem, which I think is a big deal. Lots of different solution paths make for a better outcome for kids. So I think some resources are better. I think you can do it with any resource.
Okay. So, and that's where, as a consultant coming in and looking at the schools, like you could, even before you're on site with a school, you would have a pretty good idea based on what curriculum they're using, the resources that that you know of. You could put together a pretty good path for them for a really significant positive change coming out, and then it's really just about implementation and gaining the skills. Teachers are going to have to do some skill adaptation. It's not necessarily, that it's not, they don't have to become new people.
You know what it is though, Scott? It's a shift in mindset.
Yeah.
It's a shift that says, I'm not the center of what's going on here, my kids are. And I need to be curious about how they think. Because if I can get curious about how they think, that will help me make sense of what my next steps are as a teacher. In my previous way of teaching, I didn't really have to know how they thought because I knew what I was going to help them see and help them learn. And even when I think I had a great classroom culture, my kids got along well, they worked well together and all of that. But I had to make the shift from being teacher-centered, and it sounds very basic, but it's really, really complex, to being student-centered.
Yeah, no.
I really need to listen to my kids. I really need to think about how do they make sense of this, and how do I help Scott? How do I help Heidi? How do I help Rebecca? How do I help Stephen? So that we can reach all kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So in your experience, if I'm a school and going, okay, I'm all in. This is like, we got to do this. We got to get Heidi on the books. We got to get her in to do our PD. When certainly there would be some teachers for whom this would be a fairly quick transition. This would be a fairly easy, like it's kind of intuitive for them. They'll be like, oh, finally I have the freedom. I get to do this. For those for whom that's not the case, who maybe have a narrow experience in terms of how they've learned math and how they've taught math, and this would be a really significant change. What kind of, what's the timeline? What would it take for a teacher like that to be prepared to make those changes in the classroom?
I think the first thing is every teacher, whether they are on board or not, needs an experience of learning like that. So they need as much as, workshops are kind of frowned upon. I think you have to have a workshop because most of us did not ever experience learning math that way. So you need to experience it and feel it and get a sense of that's how it can feel to learn math. That is so cool. So you need some kind of upfront work, and probably as a team, your whole math team. And then I think your trailblazers are they're gonna take it and they're gonna run, but they're gonna get stuck too because we're talking about a huge cultural shift. It will take them probably it'll probably take them years to actually get to where they feel completely proficient. But they'll catch on and it'll be some time. But I still think they need support, probably for a year, maybe two. Whether you get one-on-one support where someone's in your classroom or your team is in your classroom doing some structured observations to help one another get better at it. I think you're going to have some PLC time to embrace my challenges. When we first started, there were 5 of us who were all in, and we would go to lunch every day and go, I don't know what I'm doing today. And someone else would go, oh, I did that same lesson. This is what I did. This is why it worked. And having that somebody to bounce it off of and to be safe to say, I don't know how to do it today. I am stumped. And my kids didn't respond the way I thought they would. And then also getting to be the person who goes, oh, today it worked great. Let me be the expert. And so the 5 of us had that just all the time. And so creating that culture for teachers it will take some time. But it doesn't take long for them to go, okay, I can take my first steps. Now I'm stuck. Now I'm going to take some more steps. It's just the way learning is. That's just learning in general.
Yeah. So now I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, so you don't have to have an answer. You can just say, "I'd have to
Okay.
think about that." This is not like I'm not expecting an answer, but if it's a smaller school, again, let's pick on my experience. I had two math teachers. So as a group, that's a pretty small. I mean, they were pretty connected, but that's a pretty small group, and it's really more of a interpersonal versus a team, right? Would you recommend doing PD kind of for the whole school on this way of thinking, using math as the example, but saying here, it's kind of the reverse of like the traditional flipped classroom. When we had somebody come in and talk about it, they were an English or a social studies teacher, and they were talking about it, and the math and science folks were like rolling their eyes, like, "There's no way I can't." And their big thing wasn't that they didn't agree. Their big thing was my curriculum doesn't work like that,
Right.
because it's the culture like shifted. I wonder if we had PD and had the whole school go through having you do the workshop and do math differently. I feel like that could shift our whole culture, kind of giving all of our teachers permission to move away from the lecture and from the teacher-centered learning to student-centered learning. And using math as an example is very empowering, both for the math teacher as well as for everybody else, to say, oh, if you can do it in math, like that transformative moment, like, I wish I had math like this when I was in school. How many of the teachers of social studies would have been like, I might have taught math. If I could have taught math like this.
I think you're onto something, Scott. I hadn't really thought about that, but I do know, talking about that one teacher who taught social studies and goes, I'm going to do this differently now because I learned this in math. I think you're onto something there. The other thing that I think was a surprise for me is I did some work with principals, and one of the principals who I really appreciated, he came to me and go, I don't know why I'm not doing this in my staff meetings. Why am I not leading staff meetings with these types of practices? Because if I can think like this in this math workshop, certainly my teachers can think like this about their challenging work of teaching. And so I think, yes, it's really a shift in mindset about how do we engage any learner, a parent learner, a teacher learner, a paraeducator learner, any learner in deep and reflective thinking. So yeah, I think you're onto something.
Yeah, I think that's the way I would go if I were the principal, thinking about how I was going to bring you in, and if you were worth the investment just for my math, because I only have a couple math. Nah, man, I think this is way beyond that, and I think if I'm a parent listening, then I'm going to take this podcast and share it with my principal and say, hey, I think we need to be looking at this. This is what I want my kids to experience, is a very engaged, active learning environment, because research tells me that's where I get the biggest bang for my buck, and I'm spending some big bucks here. And why aren't you doing it like this? And if I'm a teacher, likewise, let's start talking as teachers about how do we make these kind of changes. They fit so much better in everything we learned. If we had a good teacher education background, this fits. Like, this is what we were supposed to do. And then we got to school and we got a textbook that didn't do it. And then we're teaching to tests. And
the school culture, Scott, I cannot speak more. The culture, not a particular school culture, the culture of schooling makes it very difficult. So I think when a whole school embraces it, it becomes easier for us to stand shoulder to shoulder and say, we're embracing a fascinating and new way of thinking about how kids learn.
Yeah.
Math,
and I think
language arts, science, STEM, tech, music.
Yeah. Oh, well, this is very, very exciting. I hope that we will include your contact information with this podcast. I hope that your phone just rings off the hook, and your email messages, you get overwhelmed and you have to bring in a whole bunch of teachers and train them, because this is a movement. Because I just really think that this is, especially when I see the growth in international schools, and you've got a lot of young international schools who aren't established. I spoke with a principal. They're adding 11th grade for the first time this year, right? They haven't even gotten all the grades. So they don't have the restriction. Like, they have a new culture. I emailed somebody this morning whose next year will be their first year as a school, right? He's the new head of school. Well, he better be talking to you before he hires any teachers. He needs to hire all people that have what you have to offer and are trained. Like, you need to meet with them before they start classes and just start from the beginning. This is what this school is going to be like. Like, how easy would that be?
A lot easier than changing it later. That I promise.
Exactly.
I've done the changing part.
Yeah. Well, thank you for what you do. Our kids, as somebody who's very student centric and always in keeping in mind, how do we as schools produce flourishing adults? I think this is a major key to doing that. And it would make everything I do in career and in college readiness so easy if we were led in math and we already had thinkers, then everything I would do in terms of helping kids tell their story would be natural. Like it puts me out of a job. I'll be honest, but I think that's okay. I'll
That would
find
be
something
great.
else to
Yeah.
do. Yeah, because
Mostly
they would.
if
Yeah,
if kids flourish, we don't even need adults.
exactly. They can flourish on their own. So this is awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for being on Global Student Voices. I hope that this message gets around. And please, if you're listening in, please reach out to Heidi. And building excellent educators. Let's make sure that we have the best of the best in our international schools serving these students, because we know they're special, and we should be doing special things for them. So thanks, Heidi.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning into Global Student Voices. We're committed to bringing you the best advice and to share stories for global students and educators. We need your help. Make sure you subscribe, share, rate, and review our podcast. Follow us on social media for more updates, and we'll see you next time. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.